Beijing's message to Taiwan's voters just doesn't seem to be getting through. William Lai's win in Saturday's first past-the-post presidential race means an unprecedented third straight term for what the mainland has dubbed the pro-separatist DPP. We'll hear what the victor, who's also the outgoing vice president, had to say against the long and steady ratcheting up of tensions in the Taiwan Strait and the carefully staged response from Washington with the visit of a high-level bipartisan delegation. What's at stake when it comes to Taiwan and US-China relations in this, also an election year for the Americans, and a time of rapidly slowing growth for the Chinese. At the heart of it all is China's influence in its own backyard. After calling time on Hong Kong's special status, has it further turned the Taiwanese away, or do the opposition's gain in legislative elections on Saturday tell perhaps a slightly different story? Today in the France 24 debate, can we call it Beijing's loss looking at those elections? And joining us, Taiwanese journalist Diane Liu, journalist at the English language desk of French broadsheet of record Le Monde. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thanks for being with us. Thanks as well to geopolitics analyst Alex Wang. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
France 24's former Hong Kong correspondent now hangs his hat in the newsroom. Oliver Farry is with us. How are you?
Hello.
All right, and we're going to be crossing over in a moment to the World Economic Forum in Davos. Andrei Lozakog-Petri, the president of the Joint European Disruptive Initiative, which advocates for the development of innovation industries here on this continent, will be joining us live as soon as we have that video link all set up. Your reactions on the hashtag F24debate. Third win in a row for the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, but it's far from a rout. In a three-way race, the winner garnering just 40%, as you can see from this graph from the Reuters news agency, and the DPP losing its outright majority in Parliament. There you see the makeup of the Parliament on the bottom line and the threshold there, which corresponds to that 8-vote share of the TPP, of Taipei's populist former mayor Hu Yu-hai. They get to play kingmaker. William Lai acknowledging the results in his acceptance speech.
I will follow the constitutional system of the Republic of China, maintain the status quo, neither humbly nor arrogantly, replace containment with communication, replace confrontation with dialogue with dignity, talk with China with confidence to improve the benefits of people from both sides, and reach the goal of maintaining peace across the strait.
Diana Liu, is that the message that's basically would have been the same had he had an outright majority?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, it's true that for these three different parties, I think that the foreign policy of all these parties, maybe in the terms of particular, there is disagreement, but in the terms of what all the parties and what the Taiwanese actually want is to maintain peace in the Taiwan Strait. Also, it's true that these different parties differ in how Taiwan's status should be going forward, whether it's an independence that veers more towards China or further away from it towards the US and towards other democracies. But it is true that I think the majority of Taiwanese voters, and this has been expressed in the results of the election, that people want to continue to maintain their way of life. They want continued peace in the Taiwan Strait, and they do want a status quo that is favorable to the well-being and the peace in the country. And I do think that Lai does a good job at expressing certain firmness, but also restraint.
So why was Beijing so disparaging, in their daily foreign ministry briefing?
I think that Beijing just has a tendency to warp, no matter what no matter what Taiwan politicians say about the state of their own country, also warp as well what foreign politicians are saying in response congratulating Taiwan's victory, congratulating Lai's victory, and also congratulating this astounding, really democratic exercise in the country. The turnout was nearly 72%. I think. So I think that this is just, more of Beijing's wolf warrior rhetoric. Trying to obscure this Taiwanese message of, honestly continued peace. And Lai is for the continuity of Taiwan's policies, maintaining peace and maintaining this current status quo.
That's one of the criticisms that's been leveled against Beijing, that they only know menacing rhetoric when it comes to Taiwan. Could they have had a more soft approach during the campaign?
I think maybe they are working on it instead of warrior approach. And I think we will see some changes in 2024.
In the way that they speak?
I think we will see some change in 2024, because the objective of two sides is to maintain the peace and to avoid the war.
Oliver Farry?
Well, I think Beijing has sort of struggled in Taiwan simply because it's difficult to influence a country that you're actually too much like, really. China does very, very well at influencing overseas Chinese communities, for instance, in English-speaking countries, largely through United Front initiatives. But that is because mainly those overseas communities are a little bit sort of locked into the Chinese ecosystem, the WeChat and various other social media initiatives. So they're probably getting a little bit more of the official line. Taiwan is very much a free country. It's got it speaks two of the same languages that speak on the mainland, Mandarin and Fujianese, and which is known in Taiwan as Taiwanese, of course. But they can very much see through all this. Even those sections of Taiwanese society, and there are quite a few who are very, very disposed.
Are you saying that Beijing is
unification.
bad at messaging?
It's pretty bad at messaging, and also it doesn't really understand. It doesn't really understand a slightly different system. And actually, Taiwan is not really a slightly different system. It's a much bigger system. It's a much different system. For instance, Beijing had real trouble getting influencing votes in Hong Kong until they completely rigged the system and did away with any form of democratic representation. In Taiwan, they don't have that option. They do sometimes have certain attempts at interfering either through media initiatives or through parties themselves, but there are generally the horses will be scared. And one of the big problems with the Kuomintang this time was former President Ma Ying-jeou, just before the election, said that Taiwanese voters should trust Xi Jinping. And this was a huge own goal. So even if Beijing is getting things wrong, they will have their people, so to speak, on the island of Taiwan that will probably shoot themselves in the foot as well.
We can now say hello to André Lozicug-Petri, who joins us from the Swiss resort of Davos, where the World Economic Forum is taking place. Thanks for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Good evening.
You just heard Oliver Farry there saying that for all the years, and Taiwan's had democratic elections since 1996, Beijing doesn't quite get what's going on?
Yes, and let's not forget that the regime in Beijing has also evolved a lot since 10 years. I mean, today, a message that is not completely pleasing the master has a more difficult way to go it up to the top in Beijing. So I think the subtlety with which cross-strait relationships were handled probably 20 years ago, also at the moment where KMT was in power, is more difficult today. And secondly, we can see it. I mean, it's more easy to invade physically a country than to invade it psychologically with disinformation. Disinformation is a new facet of warfare that is not a science. It's an art, and everybody's learning by doing.
All right, some better than others, you're saying. Just a quick word, Diana Liu, on because we showed at the beginning that graph with the results of the presidential election, the makeup of the new parliament. You have this kingmaker party, the TPP, run by the former mayor of Taipei. Only 8 seats. And it's anyone's guess which way the TPP will tip the scales. Among those elected, Wang Kuo-cheng, who we can show a picture of. There he is on the left. He's a former activist of the pro-independence 2014 Sunflower Movement. On the right, Huang Shangshan, ex-number 2 at Taipei City Hall, who in the past at times embraced pro-Beijing policies. So in the battle of the two Wangs, which way is this kingmaker party going to go?
Oh, wow, that's quite a that's quite difficult to say. You know, I think that definitely the two main parties, the Kuomintang and the DPP, the Minqingdan, they will definitely be doing all they can to court the TTP and, you know, to court these 8 parliamentarians who will be key in, in passing legislation through and getting anything done. And but Lai actually, he has said that the election results send a clear message. It's like you said, the DPP won by 40%, and that's compared to 4 years ago, Tsai won the vote by, I think it was 57%. Mm-hmm. And Lai has also said that he will be reaching out to lawmakers from these other parties and really trying to build build unity and find consensus in order to get things done.
We had a similar situation here in France. Can he rule by decree to a certain degree? Turn everything into a vote of confidence the way you can in France?
No. It doesn't
work there.
No, it doesn't work quite the same way. No.
All right. Well, with the ink still drying on election results, Washington had a bilateral delegation already flying in, carefully staged, careful in the words they chose. Lisa Kamenoff has more.
This US delegation arrived in Taiwan just 2 days after the island's presidential election. Under Beijing's watchful eye, former US National Security Advisor and former Deputy Secretary of State congratulated the outgoing President Tsai Ing-wen on her work and reaffirmed their strong commitment for Taiwan's development.
We look forward to continuity in the relationship between Taiwan and the United States under the new administration, and for common efforts to preserve cross-strait peace and stability.
Though informal, the visit is key for Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party, who aims to defend its island from mainland China's intimidation.
Your visit is highly meaningful. It fully demonstrates U.S. support for Taiwan's democracy and highlights the close and staunch partnership between our two countries.
A U.S. delegation visited Taiwan back in 2016 after Tsai had been elected for her first term. Though Joe Biden has claimed the U.S. does not support Taiwan independence, it remains a major arms supplier to the island, helping bolster its defense resources. But Taiwan is not recognized by most countries in the world as an independent sovereign nation, something which Beijing have repeatedly emphasized.
Taiwan has never been a country. It wasn't in the past, and it certainly won't be in the future. If anyone on the island of Taiwan thinks of going for independence, they'll be trying to split Chinese territory and will certainly be harshly punished by both history and the law.
President-elect Lai Ching-te, who will take over in May, aims to follow the same policy path as Tsai Ing-wen and has promised to maintain peaceful and stable cross-state relations.
Oliver Farry, just talk us through the staging, because we remember when the then U.S. Speaker of the House went to Taiwan, and that raised the shackles of Beijing. We had all sorts of military exercises in the Taiwan Strait. This was very carefully crafted and long announced this time.
Yeah, I mean, the timing is definitely something that will raise Beijing's shackles, but it's probably it's sufficiently low level for it not really to be that out of the ordinary. It was also significant as well that when Kevin McCarthy, in his brief period as US House of Representatives Speaker, he met Tsai Ing-wen as well, but it was significantly in California. He did not go to Taiwan for that. It's probably unlikely that we will be getting a repeat of Nancy Pelosi's visit by any high-ranking US official this year. It's an election year for a start. It's just too risky on the US side. And also, I think the Biden administration it's not exactly pivoting on China. It's not exactly softening its tone, but it's probably deciding to be a little bit more cautious. It's definitely not lifting its thumb off the scales in its support for Taipei, but it is going to be a little bit more careful. I don't really see this. I don't really see the US really being probably as maybe reckless as it was during Nancy Pelosi's visit, which Joe Biden was not particularly fond of at the time.
Alex Wong?
Yeah, the visit of Nancy Pelosi was very clearly a provocation on purpose. I think U.S. and Taiwan side should avoid this type of provocation in 2024. And I think it seems since the meeting in San Francisco.
On the sidelines of a recent Asia-Pacific summit.
I think there's something it seems that China and the US are in a sort of detente, and the US is monitoring DPP and precautiously. I'd like to mention 3 points very, very quickly. First one, Foreign Affairs published an article on November 30th, and the writer, Bernie Glaser, has given advice to Mr. Lai in event of victory, so it's the case. She has asked Lai to suspend the independence clause in the charter of DPP, and she has said that in order to avoid war, we need to make Beijing's leader to believe that a peaceful...
And suspending that clause, is it enough for Xi Jinping?
It's a part of, it's a beginning, it's a start.
Diana Liu?
Well, it is true that that clause does exist in the charter of the DPP, but Tsai and also, in continuation, Lai, continue to de-emphasize that. I mean, in fact, Lai says that, he says that Taiwan doesn't need to formally declare independence because Taiwan is already de facto independent, right? And it's true that even that kind of discourse seen from Beijing's eyes, I think, is still seen as kind of a provocation because Beijing thinks, Taiwan is already acting, even though it's not formally declaring independence or in politics. It's shying away from this declaration, but it's already thinking and acting as an independent nation. So I don't know that reassures Beijing. I mean, indeed, Beijing always criticizes Lai, who said that he is a pragmatic worker for independence. He said this a couple of years ago, and it's true that in the president-elect's future tenure, tensions with China and pressure from China will only continue to build and increase, and he will definitely have to, really watch his rhetoric and watch for these kinds of slip-ups that could anger Beijing.
Earlier in our discussion, Andrei Lizakug-Pietri, Alex Wong was predicting that in 2024 we may see those tensions dial down between Taipei and Beijing. You just heard Diana say the opposite, in effect. What do you see when you read the tea leaves?
Hard to say, but definitely the provocation will not come from the US. We can see, and we will have tonight some interesting results from Iowa that the electoral campaign in the U.S. is in full swing, so there is no. I think the U.S. is pretty happy with this continuation of status quo. One thing I did not hear so much in the debate so far is, let's not forget, yes, there is a pro-sovereignty president, DPP re-elected, but the KMT has now taken up is the largest party. So it's not necessarily a result that is completely to the displeasure of Beijing. That's point number one. Point number two, I think where the risk could come from is from a continued economic downturn and difficulties in China, because that could bring the Chinese leadership to drum up the nationalistic tone and try to divert the attention from a young population where more than 20% is unemployed. So I would say that is where the risk comes from. And when you see the disruptions in supply chain, be it in the Red Sea currently, or be it in more difficult outlook in Europe, that might not be good news for mainland China, and that in turn might stir up some tensions across the straits. But that's really prediction.
Well, that's further down the line. I want to get back to what's happening further down the line and those economic tensions. Just a quick word, though, about diplomacy. Coincidence to the calendar, the Pacific island of Nauru dropping its recognition of Taipei in favor of Beijing on Monday. Here you see President Tsai in a 2019 visit to that tropical island. That leaves just 12 countries that recognize Taiwan as the Republic of China.
While many countries around the world are congratulating Taiwan for its successful democratic electoral process, Beijing decided to suppress Taiwan and to launch an attack on international order and stability. This is revenge against democratic values and also a challenge against the global order.
Oliver Farry, regularly these stories come up about what country supports which China.
Yeah, most of Taiwan's holdouts in the diplomatic world tend to be relatively small countries. There are a few bigger ones. Paraguay, I think, is one of the main bigger ones. But Beijing has been fairly successful in peeling off, generally through promises of investment and so on. It's really, really difficult for these countries to say no, despite their long-standing diplomatic links with the Republic of China, going back, in some cases, back to the 1920s, 1930s. They can't really say no if there is offers of investment and offers of infrastructure coming along here. Taiwan is fairly powerless to do this, unfortunately. However, there is simply a fact that Taiwan, it doesn't have real diplomatic relations with most countries on Earth, but with quite a few of the influential ones, it does have representation there, and that alone is probably enough for its voice to be heard.
I was going to say, what does it change that the United States stopped recognizing Taipei and started recognizing Beijing, since there's I don't know if you call it an ambassador to Washington or...
it's the Taiwanese representative to Washington. Yeah, and the former Taiwanese representative to Washington is now going to be the future vice president.
Right. So it doesn't change anything.
I mean, I think that, of course, it is a blow, especially to Taiwan's standing in international organizations, right? Like the UN, because its official diplomatic ties could lead to these countries to advocate more for Taiwan in these organizations. But, a lot of analysts also say that the Taiwan over the past years, and especially with Europe as well, Taiwan has really developed important diplomatic ties with the European Union and many European countries. over the past few years, and I think that things really started changing with the pandemic as well. And Europe and Brussels realizing, the extent of China's influence and disinformation operations even in Europe, and realizing that Taiwan can actually be a great partner in building cybersecurity and resilience. So, although Beijing has been successful in peeling away these diplomatic allies, I think Taiwan has done a lot in cultivating relationships of cooperation with important, like-minded democratic countries.
Andrei Lizakuk-Pietri, it's nice to talk about democratic values, but the day when European nations are able to get their share of the microchips, those desperately needed microchips we all need in all our appliances, the high-end ones that are where Taiwan dominates the market. The day Taiwan does no longer dominate the market, will the support still be there? Will you still see communiques like the one you saw from the French Foreign Ministry today hailing the election?
Well, first, the communique came pretty late. It came 48 hours after the election, if I'm not mistaken. Let's take that on the account of the weekend. But this day will not come anytime soon, because Taiwan has been very, very smart to play real politics. They have been, in the case of TSMC, the most advanced company, Taiwan Semiconductors, they have been very careful not to put their most advanced nodes, that means the most advanced chips, outside of the country. So basically keeping their life insurance well on the Taiwanese island, in order to make sure that everybody understands that if Taiwan falls, it's going to be a catastrophe for the whole world from an economic and technological point of view. Will Europe change its stance? Well, if Europe had the technological strategy, maybe it would come, but so far I don't see that happening. So I think on that one, Taiwan can rest assured. Europe will stand its shoulder to the island.
I was a long way from Taiwan, but this Monday's kickoff of the Republican primaries offers a reminder that the final vote come November will have consequences the world over. It's sort of the background music to this discussion, Alex Wang. The kickoff of Taiwan's elections are over and the US elections are just beginning. Is there a favored candidate, you think, in Beijing, or is it the same, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump?
It's an internal affair for America. US, China has nothing to say.
Oliver Ferry?
I would say probably they're a little bit probably torn. They would like the predictability of Joe Biden, but with regard to Donald Trump, he is somebody that Xi Jinping probably can realize that he will probably make enough blunders to possibly move the dial a little bit on certain things, particularly on Taiwan. Trump is not a very, very astute operator, particularly internationally. He thinks he's got the measure of strongmen such as Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping, but in reality, he's the easiest mark that they can ever come across. So probably, for the most part, they probably would prefer Biden, just simply because Chinese governments prefer stability. Even in adversaries, they prefer predictability. But they would see some advantage in a return of Donald Trump as well.
Andrei Lizakuk-Pietri, is there a difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden's policies when it comes to China and Taiwan?
Well, I think some people said, amused that Biden is Trump with a strategy regarding China. So I think I would agree with the comment which has just been made. I think China will prefer the predictability. And let's not also forget something that Joe Biden unfortunately has a hard time to get credited with, is the economic rebound. I mean, the US have experienced an incredible economic growth period for the last 4 years, which also benefited China, which helped China go out of the crisis, out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Trump's policies, more erratic, may jeopardize all this.
Yeah, the U.S. Economy, 71% of American voters, according to a survey just out from ABC News, believe the U.S. economy is in bad shape. But comparisons with China flatter. With COVID and trade wars, China's share of the global economy has shrunk, there you see, since 2020, with exports down for the first time in 7 years right now. Latest growth figures out of Beijing have the economy slowing to 4.6%. You heard earlier in our discussion, Alex Wang, Andrei Luzaku-Petri, worrying that if the economy slows further, there will be more of impulse to scapegoat, more of a nationalist fervor in China, and much more tensions. Your thoughts?
I don't think so. 2024 will be a year of transition, I think, for the Chinese economy. And you have seen the forecast of IMF already. The GDP, the increase of GDP of China will be at roughly at the level of 5%. It's really it would be really a good performance already compared to other countries. In US, we will have 2.2%. So it's relative, and I think it's a year of transition. And as the impact on Taiwan, we can see that the main challenge for Taiwan in terms of economy development is to given that the 30% of Taiwan export product has China as destination, so the main challenge of Taiwan in 2024 is to start negotiate seriously with China regarding the ECFA and trade dispute.
Diana Liu?
Yes, I agree. I think that, we were speaking about semiconductors earlier and the importance, of them to Taiwanese economy and also, Taiwan's strategic position in the world. And I think that a lot of Taiwanese, want to leverage their semiconductor economy to improve trade relationships with Southeast Asia and also with Europe as well. And I think that, and also I think with the election results, some voters have said that they felt like, what they want is actually not just to decrease the island's dependence on China, but also to decrease the island's dependence on the U.S., not just to be caught in between these two superpowers. So I think that Taiwanese and the government are, really looking towards other increased economic cooperation, to sign deals if they can.
And a slowing Chinese economy, is that bad news for Taiwan?
I think that you could argue it both ways. Some might say that it's actually good news for Taiwan because, in this upcoming year, China will, as was previously mentioned, really be focusing on transitioning towards a more robust, sustainable economy. The government will really be wanting stability at this time, and perhaps not so much focused on waging a war across the Taiwan Strait. And also, it's true that while the DDP coming into a third term in Taiwan is something that China definitely feared and has responded to with aggression. Also, these past 8 years that Tsai has been in power and where relationships have really chilled with China, you see that this hasn't really helped China. This hasn't really helped China. That hasn't really helped both sides, in fact. So China could also perhaps embark on a new strategy and, maybe try to charm a bit more Taiwan and Taiwanese voters and work a bit more with the DPP, given that the past 8 years with the chilling ties between the two sides of the strait, it hasn't really gone anywhere for either side.
Do you see that happening, Andrei Lozikuk-Petri, that thaw? Again, and you were first to point out in this discussion, with that slowing economy in China?
Well, definitely, China is reconsidering its diplomatic approach to the rest of the world. The pretty aggressive way some of the diplomats were behaving in the last couple of years actually backfired. Interesting to see here in Davos, we have one of the largest Chinese delegation ever, led by the premier. So definitely, China is here again to court the world, to invest back, and so maybe we'll see the same applied across the straits. Definitely, I think there's a change going on, but it's going to be a paradox, because on one side, Xi's grip on power has never been stronger, and on the other side, there are some voices saying that this pretty aggressive stance toward the rest of the world is not necessarily delivering.
Oliver Farr, in your years reporting from Hong Kong, did you see a change in how China views the rest of the world?
Most certainly, and it was this wolf warrior diplomacy, which is named after a blockbuster Chinese film from 2015, in which Chinese special forces are sent into a war-torn country to exfiltrate Chinese citizens, something notably that people have said they haven't actually done in reality in wars. But it was a smash hit, it and its sequel. Then this was taken on by diplomats who became very, very combative, and usually in quite counterproductive ways. They would quite often, insult their hosts on Twitter and social media and so on. And it eventually wore down, and people actually back home in Beijing, and these were the main target for this wolf warrior diplomacy. It was really to gain attention and try to get some favour when you were posted back to the Chinese capital. Eventually, with people in the higher echelons in the government in China, they began to see that it probably wasn't a good idea after all. That it's one thing to be confident and assertive. It's another thing to actually alienate, potential allies or just simply try to win favour, because China has cultivated quite a lot of the global south, so to speak, particularly with its communications. It wants to see that China presents an alternative, a more ethical alternative for poorer countries than the United States or the rest of the West is. They've been fairly successful with that, and they've certainly been helped by, for instance, the West's stance on Israel's war in Gaza. China can very much point the finger and say that, well, you have one position on Ukraine. When Ukraine is being attacked, you have another position on Gaza. So China has definitely is cultivating this, but its communication and its way of going about it has not always been very, very effective.
Yeah, communication working both ways. News broke last Friday that Brussels is to probe subsidies to China's booming electric vehicle market. That was after The Economist had gone to print. Here you see their cover story this week, which portrays China's EV industry as meteors barreling towards the Earth. What's your reaction, Alex Wang, when you see this cover of The Economist?
Well, it's normal to have commercial disputes between countries. And Europe has also subsidized its agriculture industry as well. So we need to be realistic, both sides.
Is it, Andrei Lozikuk-Petri, the current mood between the US, Europe, and China, is it just a normal trade rivalry, or is this something else?
Well, I think but there are really two different. We talk about the West, but I think on one side you have the US, who has basically waken up to the challenge of China because it's a superpower, and because there's a typical rivalry between an existing one and an upcoming one. But that is already, I would say, 10 years old. The pivot that Obama wanted to do to the Pacific is stemming out of it. In Europe, I would say it's different. And yes, I will have harsh words, but I think it's typically somebody who realized he has been fooled for a lot of time, but that he's actually the fool because he was not clever enough to look into what was obvious. This EV onslaught that the Economist is smartly titling on is just something that the industry or that experts have been seeing for the 5, 6, 7 years. You just had to read the number of battery manufacturers and EV efforts done in China to see that that's going to happen. So I think in Europe, you have more a short-term panic happening because we see our industries and also our efforts right now in batteries. Think about all the efforts in the north of France or in Sweden that may be in jeopardy because of Chinese very competitive efforts on both the car but also on the component market. So here again, we need a much more strategic Europe so that it's not just waking up in panic and suddenly deciding these kind of efforts, which are often useless and look like what we say in France, a duck that you have cut its head off and it's running around madly.
So give us the temperature there, if you will, in Davos, because this is a place where
it's cold.
It's cold. That's the weather report. But what about inside where you are? After all, this is a place where once a year all these top executives come to hobnob with politicians. You mentioned Prime Minister Lee is due. Are they going to be seeing that big Chinese delegation as partners or rivals?
Well, interestingly enough, there has been a lot of discussion. I mean, that is what is known about it. A lot of meetings of the delegation, be it with the Ukrainian president or with the Swiss authorities. So I would say there is some kind of a back to normal approach of the Chinese diplomacy, which was always very much on courting and attracting investments. And we'll see after these couple of days, because it's just starting tonight, how effective it is. Interestingly enough, Antony Blinken is also hopping to Davos, and probably one of the reasons is to make sure not to leave the ground to the other superpower who is there. Then can we say that it's back to pre-pandemic? Something that is very different here is economy used to basically set the agenda. Today we seem to have basically geopolitics, which is setting the agenda that business leaders need to follow. So it's a very, very different setting, and all the geopolitical panels will be, of course, very much scrutinized here.
Oliver Farry, when you were covering the pandemic from Hong Kong, did you have that feeling that politics was going to take the precedence then over business?
It certainly looked like that for the first 6 months of the pandemic, and you could certainly see in the divergent attitudes towards the pandemic from both Western countries, which really kept their eye off the ball from the very beginning, and Asian countries, and I would put all of them in the same basket here, be it Taiwan, China, Japan, South Korea, because they had the experience of SARS 20 years previously, and were very much scarred by that. They took it a lot more seriously. So the first 6 months of the pandemic, we didn't really know where it was going to end, if there was any end in sight. We more or less, the cavalry came along at the end of 2020 in the form of the vaccine. But we were quite lucky in that sense. But you definitely saw that something was changing. And you saw both within Hong Kong itself, which Beijing used the pandemic more or less as an excuse to snuff out the 2019 protests, which had not finished by early 2020. But the pandemic more or less put paid to that. But also internationally, where you did begin to see a sort of a maturation of Beijing's view towards the West during that time.
And a view of the West towards Beijing changing. Diana Liu, when you hear Andrei Lizakuk-Petry say that it somewhat feels like back to normal in Davos, does that reassure you, or does that make you slightly nervous?
I mean, back to normal, what does it really mean, right? And I think that when you see, I really do think that the pandemic was instrumental, especially in Europe, in changing European perceptions of Taiwan and of Taiwan's importance as a partner. I just think that when you think about everything that's happened since then, like what was evoked, the crackdown in Hong Kong, the national security law, and then now that the wars that we have going on in the in the Middle East, in Ukraine, I feel like, in terms of, I really think that at least when we talk about Europe, the continent's strategy towards Taiwan is really, being, they're really seeking to define it in a way that's a lot more urgent than it was in the past few years.
So a lot more attention paid to it. Diana Liu, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank as well Oliver Farry, Alex Wong, Andrei Lizakuk-Petry for being with us from Davos. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 today.